Hello and welcome to this Jersey-specific DBS disclosure and barring LinkedIn webinar. My name is Kieran Rehau and I am one of the DBS Regional Outreach Advisors. In this Jersey-specific webinar, we are going to look at the disclosure function of DBS and when a barring referral to DBS should be made. The main purpose of DBS is to protect the public by helping employers make safer recruitment decisions and by barring individuals who pose a risk to vulnerable groups from working in certain roles. DBS aims to make sure that employers have all the necessary information available to help make those suitability decisions about the people they are employing, and we do that through the issuing of those DBS checks. And as well as that, DBS can take the next steps to bar individuals when they do pose a risk. At DBS, we want to be seen as a visible, trusted, and influential organisation that provides an outstanding quality of service to all our customers and partners. And we want to make sure that our customers and partners know how to best use the available DBS services and feel supported when doing so. And we all want to work together to make recruitment and employment safer. This is one of the reasons why the DBS outreach team works with organisations of all sizes and from all sectors across the country, and why I'm delivering this LinkedIn webinar today. The outreach programme was introduced in our current 5-year strategy, which details our ambitions up until 2025 and focuses on 3 key elements: our profile, our people, and our quality. And if you would like to know more about our plans, then you can read the DBS business plan, which can be found on the government website. So thinking specifically about the role of DBS, it is responsible for the delivery of the disclosure and barring functions on behalf of the UK government. We operate our disclosure functions for England, Wales, Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man and Channel Islands, and that's all under Part 5 of the Police Act of 1997. And that's supported by the legislation that you can see here on this slide. This legislation sets out certain things like the level of DBS checks that are available, what type of information is disclosed on the different levels of checks, and the eligibility criteria that has to be met for an individual to be eligible to apply for one of those levels of checks. For residents of Scotland, disclosure and barring functions are undertaken by Disclosure Scotland. And for residents of Northern Ireland, disclosure functions are undertaken by Access NI, but the barring function is undertaken by DBS. But wherever the check is carried out, the Police National Computer Information will cover all nations and will be accessible by the relevant disclosure body. DBS also operates the barring functions for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that's under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act of 2006, the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Northern Ireland Order of 2007, and the Protection of Freedoms Act of 2012. So these legislations set out the processes and procedures that must be followed, as well as the criteria that has to be met for us to be able to legally bar an individual. The legislation states that if someone is placed on the barred list, it is a criminal offence for them to work in regulated activity with the workforce that they have been barred from. DBS manages and maintains 2 barred lists, one for children and one for adults. Some people may just be on one list and some people may be on both. DBS can bar individuals who are or have lived or worked in Jersey. If someone is on the barred list, then this information will be disclosed on an enhanced DBS with the barred list check. And if you are considering recruiting someone to work in regulated activity, then do ensure that you adhere to all safer recruitment practices as advised by your organisation and any sector-specific and regulatory guidance. So we'll begin with the disclosure function of DBS. Let's have a look at the different levels of DBS checks, what they disclose, and the criteria that has to be met in order for a role to be eligible for a particular level of check. So there are 4 levels of DBS checks. We have the basic, standard, enhanced, and enhanced with barred list check. It is important that the right level of check is determined because an employer can only ask for the detail of information that they are entitled to see. So with a basic DBS check, there is no eligibility criteria that has to be met. Anyone can be asked to get a check and anyone can apply as an individual directly on the DBS website, and that's with no admin fees. A basic DBS check will include unspent convictions and conditional cautions. A standard DBS check, the eligibility for a standard DBS check has been set out in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974, Exceptions Order 1975. For the most part, this covers specific roles such as registering to be a barrister or people who work in the judicial court system, and those who work in healthcare who do not deliver healthcare but have contact with patients. And this check will disclose spent and unspent convictions. We then have the enhanced DBS check. Eligibility for these checks is set out in the Police Act of 1997 and the Police Act regulations. And for most part, this covers those who work with either children and or vulnerable adults and that meet the criteria but are not working in regulated activity. So this will include spent and unspent convictions and relevant police information, which is information that a chief officer reasonably believes to be relevant to the workforce or role being applied for and that it ought to be disclosed. And finally, we have the enhanced with barred list check. So eligibility is again in the Police Act regulations, which sets out when barred list information should be disclosed. Eligibility for this role is often linked to whether someone is working in regulated activity with either children and or vulnerable adults. And this check includes everything on the enhanced with a check of the check of either one or both barred lists. And we will have a look at what regulated activity is in this webinar. As you can see, the information disclosed on a DBS certificate used alongside other safer recruitment processes can help employers to make safer recruitment decisions and consider how suitable that individual is for the role that they are being considered for. DBS is able to provide disclosure certificates to people applying from Jersey. However, it should be noted that DBS can only use the English legislation when calculating rehabilitation periods and establishing eligibility for DBS checks. This is different to the equivalent Jersey legislation. And for guidance based on the English legislation, please do see DBS government website. And for information on the Jersey legislation, please see the Rehabilitation of Offenders Jersey Law of 2001 and the 2002 Exceptions Regulations. So let's have a look at the DBS Update Service, which is our online subscription and allows for DBS certificate status checks to be carried out online, letting an applicant or their employer know if that certificate is still valid and still up to date. So the update service is available to anyone who is applying for a standard or enhanced DBS check. There's an annual subscription fee, which is currently £13 a year, and more than one certificate can be included in the subscription. And for volunteers, the subscription is free. An applicant can take their DBS update service subscription with them to a new job with their new employer's discretion, providing that they are eligible for the same level of check and for the same workforce. And by workforce, we mean whether that's the adult workforce, child workforce, or other workforce. They should still share their original certificate with their new employer when appointed so that the employer can review and see if it contains any information. Individuals have to subscribe to the update service at the time that they are applying or within 28 days of receiving their certificate. The update service will check for updates against Police National Computer Information Weekly. It will check barred list status information weekly as well, and it will check for any police intelligence every 9 months. The DBS update service allows organisations to support their safeguarding measures because it allows the employer to check online free of charge, and as long as they have the individual's consent, they can make sure that the DBS certificate that somebody is showing them is still valid and still up to date. We are now going to have a look at what regulated activity with children is. When a role is in regulated activity with children, this means that an enhanced DBS with a children's barred list check can be carried out. So let's have a look at these activities. So healthcare, that's provided by a healthcare professional or someone acting under their direction or supervision. And we also have personal care, so where physical assistance is provided to a child or prompting along with supervision and instruction with activities such as eating and drinking because of the child's illness or disability, or help with toileting, washing, bathing and dressing because of the child's age, illness or disability. Healthcare and personal care only have to be carried out once to be regulated activity with children. For the rest of the activities we'll look at, there will be a period condition of more than 3 days in a 30-day period or once overnight with the opportunity for contact between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. that has to be met in order for the activity to be in regulated activity with children. If these activities are not carried out enough to meet the period condition, then the role would be in work with children and eligible for an enhanced DBS check only. So we have the teaching, training, instruction, caring for or supervision of children. Where this activity is unsupervised, it is regulated activity with children. If the role is supervised, then the supervision has to be by someone else who is in regulated activity with children, that the employing organisation considers to be sufficient enough to remove the risk to the children in the care. Please also note that if the role is supervised, then the role is in work with children and eligible for an enhanced DBS check only. Providing advice or guidance, this has to be wholly or mainly for children, and this does not include a service provided to the general public. Online chat rooms, wholly or mainly for children, where the moderator has an opportunity to access and modify the content and to interact with users. So driving a vehicle only for children, including anyone accompanying the children. That would be regulated activity with children. This does not include personal arrangements between parents or friends. Childminding, where registration is required or voluntary, this is regulated activity with children. Foster care registration, this is also regulated activity with children. And those who are directly managing someone in regulated activity with children, they are also in regulated activity, so they would be eligible for an enhanced DBS with the children's barred list check. There are different rules for those who are aged 16 and 17 and are in employment. Teaching, training, instruction, caring for, supervising, or providing advice or guidance are not regulated activity if they are provided in the course of employment. And for further information on regulated activity with children and work with children, please see the DBS Child Workforce Guide, which is available on our government website. So if someone does not meet the criteria for regulated activity based on what they do, they could be in regulated activity based on where they work. Now, these places are called specified establishments, and they have been set out in legislation because of their purpose in relation to children. So individuals working in specified establishments may not be carrying out one of the activities listed on the previous slide, but they must satisfy all the rules on this slide here in order to be considered to be in regulated activity. So, for example, a full-time school caretaker would be in regulated activity if they have the opportunity for contact with the pupils, even though they do not work directly with them. So let's have a look at regulated activity with adults. For regulated activity with adults, the activity only has to be carried out once to be regulated activity with adults and eligible for an enhanced DBS with the adults barred list check. So let's have a look at the activities. So any healthcare that's provided by or under the direction or supervision of a regulated healthcare professional. We also have providing any personal care to adults. So the definition of personal care for adults is different to the definition for children. So personal care for adults includes help with drinking, toileting, washing, dressing, oral care, care of skin, hair or nails for health reasons. So it is where physical assistance is provided, prompting along with supervision, or training or instruction is provided to an adult with these things because the adult's age, disability or illness prevents them from doing this themselves. Moving on, we also have providing social work, which is provided by a social care worker to an adult who is a client or a potential client. The assistance with the day-to-day financial running of an adult's own household and that's due to the adult's age, illness, or disability. So this specifically means managing their cash, paying their bills, or carrying out their shopping. This does not include general household work or befriending, and it has to be an arrangement through a third party, so not including family members or friends that provide this. We also have the assistance with the conduct of an adult's affairs. This suitability decision is made by the Office of Public Guardian if they decide to invoke their right to do so. Conveying an adult. So this means to move an adult from or between healthcare, personal care, or social work appointments, has to be an arrangement via a third party. So again, not a friend or family member. So ambulance drivers, hospital porters, air ambulance, for example, they are in regulated activity with adults because they convey adults. And the day-to-day line managers of those in regulated activity, they are also in regulated activity too and eligible for the enhanced DBS check with the adults barred list. And for further information about regulated activity with adults, please do see the Adult Workforce Guide that is available on our DBS government website. Now, there is a lot of other work that happens with adults that is not going to meet the criteria to be in regulated activity with adults. but it could be in what we consider to be work with adults. So the rules to find out if someone is in work with adults is detailed fully in Annex 1 of the Adult Workforce Guide that's available on the DBS website. And there are 3 steps to follow to identify whether the position you are recruiting for is carrying out activities which are in the definition of work with adults. So the first step is to look at paragraphs 9 and 10 to identify whether the job holder will be working with adults who are receiving any of the services listed. Step 2 is to look at paragraph 6 to identify what activity the job holder will be providing to those adults. And step 3 is to establish whether the job holder will be providing the activity to the adults often enough. If all 3 steps have been met, then the role is considered to be in work with adults and eligible for an enhanced DBS check. So let's now look at the barring function of DBS. So when someone poses a risk to vulnerable groups, they can be referred to DBS through 3 different routes. We have discretionary referrals, and this is when someone contacts DBS because they have concerns that an individual may have harmed a child or vulnerable adult or put a child or vulnerable adult at risk of harm. And these referrals can come from employers, agencies, keepers of registers, and supervisory authorities. We also have the auto bar referral. So this is when someone is convicted of or cautioned for an automatic inclusion offence. These are serious offences already set out in law which require DBS to bar the individual from regulated activity in the relevant workforce. When someone receives an auto bar offence in Jersey, DBS are informed of them and they are then automatically considered for barring as well. And then we have the disclosure information route. So this is when information comes to light because an individual has applied for an enhanced check with one or both barred lists. Because the individual is looking to work in regulated activity, if the Police National Computer identifies particular information that is concerning, this application will automatically go to barring for consideration as to whether that person should be placed on a barred list. For all 3 routes of referral, the individual who has been referred does have an opportunity for representation, which is when they can give their views and evidence and their side of the story, so to speak. And representations are an important part of making those fair, consistent, and thorough barring decisions. So when can a barring referral to DBS be made? So a referral to DBS should be made when 2 conditions have been met. The first condition is that permission has been withdrawn for a person to engage in regulated activity, and that could be through a dismissal, they've been redeployed, retired, made redundant, or they have resigned. And the second condition is that the person has either engaged in relevant conduct, and by this we mean conduct that endangers or is likely to endanger if repeated against or in relation to a child or adult. It could be that the person may have harmed someone, or their actions may have indirectly caused harm, or they could have put somebody at risk of harm. So an action or an inaction that did or could have led to harm being caused. Condition 2 is also met if they satisfy the harm test. So by this we mean behaviour where there's no evidence of relevant conduct, but there is sufficient and compelling evidence of risk of harm to a vulnerable group. So for example, the way an individual speaks or behaves leads others to believe that they could pose a risk to vulnerable groups either at the moment or in the future. Finally, condition 2 is also met if the person received a caution or a conviction or been convicted for a relevant offence. So when these 2 conditions have been met, a referral to DBS should be made. And if you require any further advice on this, please do look to your organisation's safeguarding policy and seek sector-specific and regulatory guidance. Even if these conditions are not met, and in the interest of safeguarding children and vulnerable adults, you think it is appropriate to make a referral to DBS, you can still do so, and we are legally required to consider that information. Once a referral has been made, DBS caseworkers will then decide if the individual should be placed on the barred list or not, and they will only do so if it is the proportionate and appropriate thing to do. So how can a barring referral be made? So a barring form will need to be completed, and the form will ask for details of the referring party, the referred individual, and the reasons why they are being referred. You can also send us any supporting and documentary evidence to help our caseworkers understand the case as much as possible. And it is important to provide us with as much information and detail to help our caseworkers make the decision as to whether the individual should be placed on the barred list or not. And we have an online form that makes it faster and easier for you to send a referral to us, and the link will be available at the end of the webinar. Referrals can also be made to the DBS using a paper referral form, which can be downloaded and printed if needed. We cannot guarantee the security of information until it is in our possession, and will not take responsibility for such information until we receive it. And for this reason, we recommend submitting referrals via our secure online referral form. However, if you are using a paper referral form, we recommend using registered post. But once a referral has been received by DBS, a confirmation acknowledgement will be sent out to the referring party. After this, the referral will go through the barring process, and a decision will be made as to whether the individual should be placed on the barred list or not. And DBS will only place someone on the barred list if it is the appropriate and proportionate thing to do. And this brings us to the end of this Jersey-specific disclosure and barring webinar. I hope it was helpful in understanding the role that DBS checks play in safeguarding those vulnerable groups that we work with, but also the importance of making a barring referral to DBS to help prevent those who pose a risk to vulnerable groups from working with them. Should you have any further questions, you are welcome to get in touch with us at the DBS, or our contact details will be provided at the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for listening.